So, so first of all, welcome to everybody to our Agile Lean Leadership workshop. My name is Paul Norton, and I'll be joined tonight by my colleagues Kurt Nielsen and Anne Broberg, as many of you already know. So you're among friends with us this evening, so please don't be shy and try to engage with us if you can. It makes it more fun for all of us if we can do that. So the workshop is going to be about 90 minutes long, which is a little bit longer than our normal webinars. And if we have time, we'll try and squeeze a little bit of a break somewhere along the line there, so you can go and fill your coffee cups and whatever else you have to do. So there's going to be an initial session of about 20 to 30 minutes, I think, where we're going to introduce the building blocks of Agile Lean Leadership to you. And then what we're going to do is we're going to have a series of, I think, 5 breakout sessions where we're going to go and have a deeper discussion in smaller groups. And then we're going to come together a little bit later on after that to figure out what happened. And then we can chat and address the questions that arise later on. If while we're going you have any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat as we go, and we'll try to address them later on in the session. So before we get into the meat of things, I just want to tell those who don't know us a little bit about us. So we're called Agile Lean House, and our aim in life is to help organizations get more value out of their efforts. And we do that with 3 things, really. We do that with education, so we have 10 or 12 training courses that we run. We do that with assistance, which takes the form of mentoring, coaching, sometimes consulting. And we have tools that we make. We have some software tools. We have a collaboration and workflow tool called Gemba. We've got a smaller applications called Cool Estimation, which is for doing collaborative online team-based estimation. And we've got a number of other things. One of our most favorite things is that we sell a deck of estimation cards as well, and all of these things can be acquired through our shop, which is agileleanshop.com. So everything we do is based upon the values of Scrum and Agile Lean Leadership, which is what we're going to talk about tonight, which, if you like, is a kind of an extension of those basic values there. But before we get into the meat of things, I just want to pause for a little while here and maybe there you go. Thank you very much. and ask you just to think for a few minutes there. So if thinking about your own organization, you don't have to shout out or anything. You can just think about this for now or write it down. Thinking about your own organization, what is it that you like the most about your organization that you're in now? What is it that you dislike the most about the organization you're in now? And what would you do if you wanted to change the status quo in your organization? What do you think would be the most valuable thing that you can do? So just ponder those things a little bit now, and as we go through, I'm hoping that some of the ideas that we're going to put forward are going to shape the way that you think about some of those things. So okay, so let's get started. So first of all, kind of set the scene here. We want to think about the challenges that organizations face. And I know many of you will be familiar with this, because what tends to happen in a lot of organizations is someone comes along and says, okay lads, here's the plan, and we've got to have this ready in 12 months time. And as far as the planners are concerned, you're at the one end here. There's a slight incline that you've got to go up, but all you've got to do is pedal steadily and you'll reach your destination, and everything will be fine, and you'll be there on time, and no budgets will be broken, and nobody's hearts will be broken, and everything will be just wonderful. But in reality, your projects that we engage in are usually more like this, particularly in high-tech companies where there's a great deal of innovation that goes on. So there's a plan for sure, but there are an enormous number of obstacles that are in the way there. And this is really what we think of in terms of complexity. So the idea of Agile and Scrum is really to start dealing with situations where we have unknowns that are introduced into the project. We've got a project, we know where we're going, but we don't always know how we're going to get there. So why is this? So actually, there's a bit of a disconnect, because we tend to think that we've got a lot of control over things, but in actual fact, we don't have that much control. Technology is changing all the time, so there are new developments that interrupt what we want to do. Kurt and I were working on something this morning, and all of a sudden Google stopped. So we were hung up for a few moments there. I mean, that was a minor glitch in our day, but in a lot of cases, are much more serious things than that. The world is different now than it was 20, 25 years ago. The pressures of globalization and consolidation put a lot more pressure on people in their lives, in terms of pricing, in terms of the speed at which things happen. And because of these two things, we get hit by the unknown time and time again. And this word unknown is something that I just want you to put in the back of your mind and think about all the time, because it is the backdrop for a lot of this. So a lot of the complex challenges that are out there, and the traditional way of approaching these things is, okay, yeah, we have a complex challenge, let's bring in an expert. What we found is that experts can't solve a lot of today's problems because they've never seen them before. You can't be an expert in something that's never happened before. So our contention, and I think the contention of a lot of people now, is that when you have to solve complex problems, you have to get the engagement of a lot of different people in it. But unfortunately, in a lot of organizations around the world, engagement is not what we have. And I'm going to explain these statistics a little bit later on. But based upon a Gallup study, they claim that about 85% of the global workforce is disengaged, which means that they have, in varying degrees, little or no interest in what goes on in their company, and little or no commitment to the company's aims. And about 18% of those people are actively disengaged, which means that not only are they not really committed to doing anything, they're actually actively working against the aims of the company. The same study looked at a lot of larger organizations and concluded that in a lot of the sophisticated projects that go on, between 50 and 70% of the effort that is expended is wasted. It's wasted because people didn't really understand what the customer wanted, or somebody went off and developed something because it looked like it was a good idea, but no one ever really asked for it in the first place. Another statistic, about 15% of the US economy, and I suspect it's similar for other economies around the world too, is just wasted on useless bureaucracy, people filling out forms and things for no particular end. So you may think that this is a sort of an extreme way of thinking about this, but if you take this idea on board, what we think is that the traditional hierarchical form of power-based management doesn't work for us anymore. So the idea of Agile Lean Leadership is to provide a new model for organizations which helps solve a lot of these problems. And to some degree, we need to go back a little bit here, because we need to rediscover, if you like, some of the core principles and values that were created maybe 60, 70 years ago when lean manufacturing came out. Lean manufacture focused on the customer, the removal of waste, and above all, the respect for people. And part of having respect for people is respecting the fact that people are more likely to participate, engage, and give of themselves if they have some kind of intrinsic motivation for being there, if they get something out of going to work other than just a paycheck. And another thing that we'll talk about later on there is that because of this, and because we're looking to get people engaged and fired up and committed to things, we want to be able to change the authority model a little bit, and we want to give as many people as possible the authority to act, provided of course that they have the competence to do that. And before we go on to the next, so just you'll see we often refer to W. Edwards Deming, and we'll talk about him a little bit more on the next slide. One of his famous quotations was that we must preserve the power of intrinsic motivation, dignity, cooperation, curiosity, joy and learning that people are born with. And we think that this is an essential thing as far as getting people engaged in the work that they do. So let's move on. So if we're thinking about taking an ordinary, traditionally organized organization and transitioning it to an Agile Lean organization, how do we go about that? How do we start thinking about that? Well, coming back to Mr. Deming here, one of the first things that we write down on our list here is that we want to change the way that we approach work. So quite often someone will give you a project and say, how long is this going to take? And you say, I don't know. And they say, okay, I'll put down 5 hours or something like that. And then they expect you to do it in 5 hours, even though you have no idea how long it's going to take you. So what Deming came up with in the context of work where there is fragmented knowledge or unknowns, he came up with this simple model here, which we call the PDSA cycle: plan, do, study, and act. You make a plan as best you can, you do it, you look at the results, maybe an experiment, and then you base your next action on the results of what you just did. And that is at the foundation of handling complex work where there are unknowns. In addition to that, some of the things that Deming brought to us was this idea of focusing on the customer. Remember, I said that 50 to 70% of work that's done is wasted because no one ever asked for it. Well, think about the customer. Think about how you can re-engage with the customer and find out what they really want. Another principle or aim of Agile Lean Leadership is to increase the clarity of goals and values. We'll talk again in a little bit about this, because a lot of times people are handed a job and say, well, go ahead and do this, and you don't really know what's expected of you. So we think it's very important that when you're setting out on a project, that everybody that's engaged in it knows exactly what they're going to be doing. We talked about allowing people to grow and getting their engagement. And part of this is based upon this idea of psychological safety. Psychological safety in this context means that when you're within your team, when you're anywhere there, you should not be afraid to speak out, and you should not be afraid to tell the truth. Because quite often you'll find that telling the truth in a traditional organization gets you into trouble because it's not what people wanted to hear. But if you don't base everything you do on the facts as they are, then you're in trouble. We like people to have a greater sense of autonomy. We want people to have the confidence to know that they can act within the confines of the goals that we set out there, to take decisions on their own if they have to. We want to create opportunities for people to develop their competencies. If you come to some of our other training courses, when we talk about how we put teams and things together, we're often looking for people that have got a secondary skill, because sometimes within the context of a team, it might be useful for you to be able to back up another team member. If you've got a secondary skill, that helps the team, also helps you because it gives you something else to do, something else to enhance the satisfaction you get from doing the job. This is part of the intrinsic motivation. So within an Agile Lean Leadership team, we're looking for maneuverability. And by that we mean that we want to be able to detect when there are novel situations, and we want to be able to understand them as thoroughly as we can, as quickly as possible, and then be able to act, do something about it. We need resilience within our organizations. We need the ability to be able to to reconfigure, recover, and repurpose as a way of reducing the risk within our organization and the risk of uncertainty. And then my throat's going dry here, so please excuse me while I have a sip of water here. And what we also want to do is to turn the maneuverability, the resilience, the engagement into positive influences. And we'll see this in a second there. But what we have discovered is that organizations that have the greatest degree of engagement also have the best outcomes, whether those are to do with individual or team performance, or whether they're to do with the commercial, the bottom line. But teams with high levels of engagement perform better, have better relationships with their customers, have longer and more satisfying relationships with their customers, have improved employee and stakeholder outcomes. Employees stay longer, they build better products and services, and have less waste because of the overall organizational commitment there. And then the final point on there is that because of all of this stuff, because people are happier at work, there's less stress, they take less sick leave, and actually they don't go off to find new jobs as frequently. So another quote from Deming here before we move on to the next one. The greatest waste is the failure to use the abilities of people, to learn about their frustrations, about their contribution that they are eager to make. So that's the basis of this from Deming. So I gave you some statistics a little while. I just want to tell you a little bit more about that. So the statistics that we came up with are based upon a survey that Gallup has done. In fact, Gallup does these surveys every year. So the one that we took these statistics from was a survey that was done in 2017, and Gallup has got this this questionnaire that they call the Q12, which is a series of 12 questions which they asked people. And what they did was they went to 192 organizations in 49 different industries, 34 different countries, and they did this study. So you can see huge number of people were involved in this study, and I'm going to give you some of the results over here now. So this is a table of what happened. So this is admittedly based upon comparing the best with the worst. But going from the right-hand side of the screen and working to the other side, the best companies were 22% more profitable than the worst. They had 21% better productivity, and they had 10% higher customer ratings. The quality of the products that they did had 41% less defects in them. So by having engaged, committed, happy workers, they make less mistakes. There were less safety incidents in the organizations. And the one that kind of puzzled me, I had to ask what this word meant. Shrinkage, 28%, that's theft. So there was 28% less stealing from the companies, which I think is, because I think the people felt some kind of commitment and some kind of bond with the company that they work for. They didn't think it was right to start stealing from them. So 65% lower turnover, that's staff turnover. And the last one on there, 37% less absenteeism. I didn't go through all of every single thing on here because I think you're going to get the PDF of this later and we don't need to dwell on it. But I think you get the idea here is that when you start having these kinds of organizations where people are more engaged, it actually helps everybody, helps the employees, helps the quality of the product, helps the customers. So,
hey, Paul.
Yes.
Did we skip this section here because we're
course.
probably running out of time?
Right, yes, sorry, yeah, I am a bit of an old windbag. So, all right then, so I will hand it over to you then, Kurt.
Thank you. As usual, we have more things to say than we have time. So in this case here, we'll just quickly move on and say, so what is this then with Agile Lean Leadership we're talking about? The main premise is where Paul has now given you some data that hopefully would indicate that you can expect some positive changes if you can actually achieve engagement, etc. There are some positive things that we've seen from experience, and there's lots of companies who've tried it. And the next claim is you can do certain things by changing the environment or the organization. One of the things Deming said years ago was that most of the issues we're dealing with, and he hovered around 85 to 95%, is due to the system we work in and not individual errors. So by getting the system right, we can actually achieve an awful lot, and that's what we're going to head into now in the next section here, and then we're going to discuss some of those things in detail, and hopefully we will manage to do that on time. So we're proposing an Agile Lean organization as a sort of alternative to the classic hierarchy that we know so well. There's a man in the top, there's some purple guys in the middle, some gray matter at the bottom where the work happens, and what goes down, commands, resources.
Kurt, you're not sharing your screen, just so we don't know what purple guys is.
Purple guys.
Yeah.
Look at that. What about now?
There you go.
Okay, so again, Zoom managed to confuse me about seeing everybody, but all right, I probably can't get that one right, and then I'll continue here. So here's the traditional hierarchy. Commands, resources, and control go down, and reports and deliverables go up. And what happens is that we build the hierarchy to achieve compliance and predictability. It's always been like that, and it still is. So that's what we achieve here. But how could that ever be different? That's a big question. And the section we skipped was really about Stanley McChrystal, and he introduced in his campaign in Iraq 20 years ago what he called a network of teams or circles. A different way of collaborating than the strict hierarchy. The hierarchy is too slow. It sort of was okay 100 years ago, and during mass production, big production environments and so on, but for quickly changing environments, not really. And so we propose to build an organization of teams. We call them circles to make it a little bit more general. We start with the customer, describe the customers that we see in our organization. We create some teams or some circles that are to service these customers in the best possible way with the best possible competences we can come up with. There are relations. We describe what happened here between the customer and the circles in the organization. What is it they want? What is our agreement typically with the customers? And sometimes we have circles behind the frontline circles that we call customer service circles. But we have circles behind that do not have customers out in the wild, but they have internal customers. So primary E here services C and D. And quite often we have a service circle where all kinds of traditional services like finance and legal support, HR, reception, etc. resides. We may also hook in our supplier. And some of you have already guessed it. This is the value stream straight out of Lean. And that's the key thing. The key thing is a value stream. That's, according to Deming also, what keeps our focus on the customer. Deming said about the hierarchy with his deep voice, he said, in the hierarchy, the boss is the customer. Who takes care of the real customer then? And that's a good question. So we structure the organization to constantly have a true north, our nose directed towards the customer, the one we serve. Now, that's all very well. And so what happens to decision making? In the hierarchy, it's very easy. The boss makes the decision. This is sort of slightly more if not going all the way and calling it democratic, but it's certainly representative decision making, because we have some circles above where the people from the primary circles occasionally may meet and decide on matters of common interest that cannot be dealt with in a single circle. Sometimes we have to behave like grown-ups and see what's best for all of us. So if you take each of the circles here, they are like a scrum team. And now I sort of assume you know what a scrum team is and what the roles are. But the blue guy is like the product owner. He's the one who prioritizes to get the most value. And occasionally these blue guys meet up here in order to decide on strategic matters for all of us, because it can't be dealt with in a single circle. So it's not that we are romantic about we don't need to make decisions or handle difficulties. It just happens this way instead of in the hierarchy. The hierarchy came out of the Prussian army in 1941 and has stayed with us ever since. And it's very good for finding the guilty party, but it's not good for fast movement. So what goes up are issues, ideas, escalation, and what goes down is resolution, delegation, and investments. In the value stream, the teams have relations to each other and they can delegate work. So primary C can ask primary E to deliver something to them. It's just like placing an order. And these things are very well negotiated, described, and committed to on both sides. And hence they tend to work, as compared to many things in traditional organization that are crossing the lines of the hierarchy. They tend to not work. So on top of this, I mean, the value stream is terribly important, because that's what all organizations live by, that we serve somebody that are willing to pay our bills. But we also have other things that are of cross-cutting concern, and we call that secondary circles. So some of these people in the primary circles may participate in a circle that deals with a particular matter, which could be security, it could be tests, quality assurance, it could be design. Or so in each of the teams, there are people with certain competencies. From time to time, these people need to meet in order to discuss their area of competence and grow it and make decisions common for the company. And we call them secondary circles. If some of you have read the story about Spotify, they call them guilds and chapters of guilds. Some people call them communities of interest. And that's a primary, that's an extra addition also. And then finally, occasionally, although we have designed our organization the best we could, something unexpected happens and we have to do something, and that's called a drop into chaos. And so we start a transient circle. And that's really the main idea that we want to promote to you about the Agile Lean Leadership. I would like to jump forward a little bit and just talk very shortly about the complexity in this. Why is it that we're doing this? And very quickly, just one of Dave Snowden's input here to complexity. What is complexity? That is when we have only fragmented knowledge, and but we have to do something anyway. And what he talks about is how the work we have to do can be either ordered or unordered. And if we split the ordered into the clear and obvious, where we can have best practices, and the complicated, where we need to analyze and research before we can respond, but facts are there. And then on the other side, we have the complex, that where we have fragmented knowledge, and we have to experiment, set up hypotheses, and verify them in order to get anywhere. We have emerging practice, and then finally we have the chaos domain, and that's where we really don't know what to do about a new thing, and that's why we deploy the transient circle. In the middle, we have confusion and disorder. That's where you are when you don't know where you are, if you don't think about it. And traditional planning is okay over here. Knowledge is there, knowledge is stable. We can find it. We may have to work to find the knowledge, but we can be found, and we can make a plan. Where Agile and Scrum traditionally are strong up here, where there's a significant amount of complex that requires a more experimental thinking than an analytic. There's also a borderline here, which we won't talk too much about: radical innovation, design thinking, etc. But that's where we dip our toes into chaos. And finally, at the bottom, we have the zone of complacency. But remember this, that the reason we are doing this is that we have a much higher degree of complexity than we had in the 20th century. That's why we are trying to do this and have an organization that allows people to work closely together in the team and solve these problems together, but also have the organization that allows teams to work together in a way similar to the one people do inside the teams. So we'll leave it like that, and I think we'll jump forward to just talk about complexity and some of the constraints that we have in them. So Paul, is that okay to skip to the next? I think we have had overstretched our capability of talking fast here. We want to introduce you to the discussions we would like to have with you, and the discussions we're going to have is about those constraints that we add to what you traditionally would know as Scrum or Agile. So here's our world, big and fluffy, no clear lines, complex. Scrum, for example, is really defined by a small set of constraints. We do sprints, we have quality, very high focus on quality, definition of done, finishing everything, each sprint. We have fixed roles with clear definitions of what does these roles do. We have a set of proposed events, activities, if you will, or meetings that gives you the structure and the flow of things. And we have some artifacts, the backlogs, where we make things visible and used as a visual support for our little mind. And there are not terribly many of those. There are just these few constraints, and that's why Scrum is easy to remember. Still hard to do, but easy to remember. Dave Snowden called these enabling constraints. Some constraints we agree on. Obviously, there could be many other constraints than the Scrum ones. And it's not supposed to be a religion you follow by the book. I mean, but it's a good starting point. And in the same way, when we defined Agile Lean Leadership, and who is we, a set of Scandinavian Agile coaches and trainers, said what happens when we scale it out in the organization. And we try to come up with a small set of extra constraints to add on top of this. And you actually saw them already in the drawing before. But first of all, we focus on circles. The customer circle, primary circles, and supplier circles. We focus on defining the relations, the manifests, and the delegations. And those two things together constitute the value stream, how value flows through the organization and all the way to the customer, hopefully with an invoice and being paid in the end. Then we have the resolution circles to make sure that if we disagree on things, and that will always happen when you have more than one circle, and resolve matters both in the tactical area, the strategic area, and the operational area. We can escalate and get decisions done. And we had the secondary circles for dealing with cross-cutting concerns, an important aspect, but we call them secondary because after all, the primary is more important. And then we had the tangent circles when something really unusual happened, and how do we do that? The tangent circles are put together quickly and disbanded once they had done their job. So this looks confusing, but the blue part here is really the playing field for Agile Lean Leadership. There is 5 more constraints that we've tried to define on top of that. Not too hard to remember. And with that, we will just try and go through some of those things before we try and go into the breakout rooms. So let's look at the circle, which is, those of you who know Scrum, it's very much like a Scrum team. We call it a circle because some of the circles may actually have more teams. They may be scaled up, one backlog and multiple teams. So the circle is a generalized Scrum team, but they have relations with each other where delegations can occur. And we have the same artifacts, but we also have a manifest, and that's what a manifest is, like a description of the circle, saying who are we, what are we doing, and that's public, and that's to make the organization transparent, so everybody can see what goes on in here. It's making things transparent. It has a main backlog, a tactical backlog, which could be sprints or could be Kanban, or maybe you have an even better idea of having a task board to control the tactical backlog. And we recommend having an improvement backlog where ideas for improvement that we are working on to implement are shown and maintained and worked on. And the roles, the product owner in a general setting where it's not really product development, but anything else, deals with the strategy. The Scrum Master deals with the operations, is looking into the organization for improvement. And we have the teams, just like we have in Scrum. And when we design these teams, these circles, we do it with the purpose of high internal coherence and low external coupling. Then we get the best results, most modular and most independently operating. So with all that, we have those 5 extra constraints: the customer, the primary circles, the value chain, the relations, the manifest and the delegations, the resolution circles, the secondary circles, and the transient circles. And what we would like to try now as an experiment is to send you out in some breakout rooms and try and discuss this. What can you see right now? What this will help you do?